going to talk about what universal design is and specific aspects that make universal design successful when it is applied, as well as some examples of what universal design looks like. So, universal design is defined as an activity or product that is accessible to people of all abilities without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So this can be applied, this talks about applying it in activities for equal participation, but it can also be applied in the environment in a way that doesn't exclude individuals with disabilities. So the reasons for incorporating it is to prevent disability isolation, which occurs when somebody with a disability is isolated from their disability due to the lack of accessibility of an environment or activity that separates them from the group and hinders their participation. So it's also incorporated to promote inclusion, equitable participation, to foster a positive and accepting environment, and to facilitate the socialization and participation of all children regardless of their ability. So there are 7 main principles that were identified by an article that contribute to the universal design of an environment or activity. So for something to be successfully accessible to all people, it should have equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, a tolerance for error, low physical effort, and appropriate size and space for the approach and use of that activity or environment. So breaking down these principles more specifically, the first one was something should be equitable in use, which means that it is used in the same way for all users whenever possible. So in camp activities, it means providing options. So an adaptation for someone that may need trunk support, such as in the picture, can be used by all children involved. So it's not isolating the person that needs that trunk support. And when that's not possible, then an equivalent option should be offered. So further examples are pathways to camp activities that are usable for all participants, so that if you have a ramp available, but then the original pathway to an activity is shorter and more likely to be taken, then you're separating a child that needs to use that more accessible route, because the children that don't need to will likely take the shorter way. And so again, avoid having separate stairs and ramps to access buildings, because you're separating those that need to use the ramps if they're that far apart. Another example in a ropes course is having a ropes course that has all ramps so that it's used the same by all children, providing color contrast in the course components for anyone that may be visually impaired to help them see, but it also helps everyone else as well, and offering supportive harnesses that can be used by all children, again, preventing the isolation. The second principle is activities should offer flexibility in use. So this kind of leads off the first one in that you have choice of method. So there are multiple ways that you can participate in the same activity that you can choose between, but there's not one specialized way for those who have disability, which again isolates them. So, and you can see the example in the picture when offering the activity of archery, providing making the environment so you can sit or stand and not having barriers in the way that force you to stand that would isolate those with a disability that aren't able to do so. Or for canoeing, having the children make a choice in what kind of seating they would like to use that offers various levels of abdominal support for those that need it, but also children that don't necessarily need it but just want to. And so, but that flexibility in use allows them to make those choices and prevent isolation. And in addition to that, activities should be interchangeable to accommodate for fatigue that may arise during an active camp day. So giving that choice, not necessarily saying you have to go participate in this physical activity that someone may not have the stamina to participate in, but they can choose another one alternatively, and that choice is given to everybody. The third principle is simple and intuitive use, in which the design of the activity is easy to understand for all participants. Any unnecessary complexity doesn't exist. A lack of experience doesn't impede someone from participating, and accommodates a wide range of literacy and language skills. So when explaining games or activities, there should not be any complex explanations required that will make participating in those activities difficult. And demonstrations should be given to facilitate understanding for all children, not necessarily just those with disabilities. So giving those visual demonstrations, just providing the information in a variety of ways to facilitate understanding. The fourth principle is perceptible information, which I kind of touched on that last slide, but providing different modes of presentation to convey information. And making sure when you're giving directions in an activity that you're highlighting what the important information is going into that activity. So some examples is if playing, for example, red light, green light, when you say go, you also hold up a green sign to give that extra input to make the activity easier to follow. Another good method is providing a visual schedule rather than just listing out what you're going to be doing that day. A visual schedule will help all children understand what the day looks like and feel that it's structured and have a sense of comfort from that. The fifth principle of tolerance for error pushes you to arrange the environment to minimize hazards and make sure that you provide warnings of any hazards still in place, to encourage focus when tasks require it to prevent any error, and to use visual and verbal cues to facilitate safety. So this example could be when a child is on a ropes course, making sure you're pointing out potential obstacles, and you're doing that with all the children so that they're more aware of it and their safety is maintained, and using visual verbal cues to signal participants when to retrieve arrows in archery, because some children may not, with just a verbal cue, register that it's time, and so using a visual cue as well will further prevent any accidents and facilitate safety. The sixth principle of low physical effort pushes the design for an activity or the accessibility of an environment to be accomplished with minimal fatigue. Repetitive activity or sustained effort should be avoided, and activities should be designed so that the participant is able to maintain a neutral body position when possible. For example, while maintaining the other principles, if you're taking a nature walk, it is helpful if the camp or facility has multiple rest points in strategic locations, such as on a scenic outlook, so that again it's preventing disability isolation, in which the person is separated because they need to take a break, whereas if it's at a scenic outlook, then everyone can stop and enjoy the view, and it's not necessarily just for that person to rest. And then it is also beneficial to alternate high and low energy activities throughout the day to maintain that energy and to prevent fatigue. The final principle, size and space for approach and use, pushes you to ensure that the environment has enough room for all campers to access the activity, and if they have an assistive device, that there's ample room for them to be able to continue to use it. It also ensures there's enough room for each participant to use all the activity components regardless of that person's size, posture, or mobility. So an example, for a fishing activity, having lower barriers on the pier so that if someone wants to sit, they're still able to manipulate the fishing pole and see what they're doing. And as we talked about the paddle before, having a variety of paddle sizes for the different sizes of people, and for so that they're able to manipulate it in the kayak and can comfortably participate. So here are just some visual examples of what universal design looks like in the environment. So you'll see in the top left one, it is a ramp and stairs that are in the same location so that someone that needs to use the ramp isn't isolated from somebody using the stairs. Below that, you have an accessible swing next to a more typical swing, but they are participating together. In the picture of the bathroom, you have a sink that is accessible to all people, including those who use a wheelchair. It has room to come under it, but it's not separated from the rest of the sinks. The bottom left and top right picture are both from Morgan's Wonderland, which is an accessible theme park for children with and without disabilities. And so that's another example of universal design in their water park that can be used by everybody. And then some general examples, such as in activities or just day-to-day, to be used by everyone. We mentioned the laminated picture schedules before that provide structure and can really help a child understand what their routine is going to look like that day. Silent disco is an example of an activity that has pretty good universal design because each individual is able to control the volume and what they're listening to. Having a chill zone available that can be used by all children when they kind of need a break. Card holders is an example of if a child has difficulty with the fine motor control that can be helpful during activities, and it can be helpful just for all children and doesn't have to necessarily isolate that one child. And then finally, sit down activities are pretty good, like sit down volleyball, in which those with and without physical disabilities are able to participate in the same sport together. So these were just a few examples. In the next video, we'll talk about a little more specifically about camp activities and how universal design can be applied to those.